back to the channel. I have with us today a very special guest that you may remember, and if you haven't already, you need to go check out his initial videos with us. So this is Dr. Francis Yu. He's going to tell us about his self-development journey and what he is currently offering for one-on-one coaching clients. And he is going to help me out with some things I really need help with today. So Francis, I would love for you to explain more about yourself and what you're offering.
Yeah, so where do I begin? Let's begin and we'll just go where it goes.
Sounds great.
So it makes sense to start somewhat from the beginning or before the beginning, right? I I was born here, right, in New York, but my parents are immigrated from South Korea. So I actually grew up, my first language was Korean, but then once I started going to school or kindergarten or pre-K or wherever, English very, very quickly replaced the Korean. It's actually very common when I'm here among people with similar circumstances where they learned a language in the first 3 years of life. Then it became replaced by another language that became their primary language. So my English is 9 times better or 90 times better than my Korean. So the reason I say that is I grew up in different contexts at the same time. Like this is the culture at home, this is the culture at school, this is the culture at work, this is how people talk, I don't know, in the dorms, in college, this is how people are at medical school, this is how people are at residency or in the on the different situations. We have different personas, masks, or different contexts. So, but I grew up early on having a lot of different contexts. And I grew up very good at adapting to what people needed from me or wanted from me in those situations. And it eventually became a very good, I don't say good, but well crafted ability or skill, really, that I didn't even realize I used later on. And then I was questioning myself. Oh, why do I feel lost or confused, or why do I keep looking at different people or different groups? I want to go in this group. I gotta go to this group because I felt like I had a different piece of myself in my different personas in these different groups. This is my home self. This is my uh, high school friend group one self, group two self, or somewhere else I'm with them self, or I'm by myself self. So looking back, I didn't notice at the time. Looking back, I realized there was a lot of who am I? Who am I really? Because I'm kind of different in different situations, which is actually pretty normal. But and then what? And I got not lost, but exploring. Hey, what does it mean? Very philosophical, and I think all my experiences in my childhood led up to this. What is it that I'm looking for, sort of thing. So very, although I can argue that's just my baseline gift, what I was born with as well, but it became very a big part of my life, right? I studied mathematics and philosophy in undergrad, right? I did math because I liked math in high school. I was really good at it. But I really liked philosophy, but I couldn't take my first philosophy class in the sophomore year because there were so many people in the upper years that took all the classes right away because it was like a ranked you get the class if you have more points sort of system. But anyway, so I majored in math and philosophy while doing my pre-med. I almost minored in physics, but I couldn't. So I'm very, very studious, I guess. And but then I realized well, I found existential philosophy. Eventually found Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is the psychological typing system that's based on Carl Jung psychology. And then I went to medical school, right? Then I went to residency, and that left me with less availability to look at all the other stuff that I really, really liked. Because, working 12 hours, taking an hour to get there and back, and it's fighting sleep while trying to do something fun along the way. But eventually, I got back to relearning and re-exploring all the stuff that I didn't have as much attention for through medical school and residency. I still did go back to my existential philosophy and Jungian psychology over the years, but after residency, I had a lot more availability, right? I studied more Jungian psychology, informally and formally, the Enneagram, informally, and at some point I got my Lean Six Sigma yellow belt and then green belt, the based on the lean manufacturing, how to make organizations more effective and efficient. So basically, a lot of different stuff from a lot of different places. I think I was just trying to make sense of who I am, what my life, what do I want, for since I was 16 years old, probably. And then I did more 200 hours of Enneagram education through the Enneagram Institute. I took an unofficial 1 year long Jungian psychology class, and it's a cognitive behavior therapy through the Beck Institute, neurolinguistics programming, reading a lot of different bad and good personal development things. Like Martha Beck is one of those. I just feel like it's just really, really good. I read a lot of bad stuff, but Martha Beck is one of those. Really, I universally would recommend. And so I've been almost everywhere. Basically, if it exists, there's a 80% chance I've heard of it. And that's including like very, very esoteric things as well. So one of those things was when I was attending, one of my residents, who's now really a really, really good friend, taught a Kundalini awakening process class with his teacher, Teo Semgo. And that was my introduction to this, I don't say real, but an actual formal, wonderful introduction to breathwork, movement work, qigong, and the word we use is cultivation. Like you cultivate land, you cultivate yourself. So cultivating my physiology, psychology, flow, energy, hormonal states, etc. And I found of these of all the things I've explored, these are the four. I don't know if I'm going to call them pillars or corners or structures or come up in some Francis Yu like term. The psychology, the Enneagram, the cultivation breath work, and what I call the 4P's. So it's like another four within the four. It's aligning purpose, plan, process, and psyche, which is partly borrowed from Napoleon's Hill Outwitting the Devil, which he talks about your finding your definitive purpose and plan. And then I combined it with existential philosophy and the Lean Six Sigma slash Scrum, which is related to Lean Six Sigma. Basically, all the other stuff, which I felt like really goes together. So those are the four cornerstones of what I feel like helped me. But one thing I don't like about some people's sort of self-help or personal development ideas is that it works for their type. It works for people who are like them or had a similar journey. But these four things can be applied to any particular story, right? In particular, for me, it was about finding meaning, finding myself, how do things work, how do I work, things like that. But these four things can be applied to people whose major struggle is perfectionism or um, false peace or feeling fake even though they're successful or
We
or
call that
feeling
like imposter syndrome.
yeah.
And you say false peace. So there's so many things, we dove pretty deeply into your exploration. And what I'm imagining you say, so I always think, especially mental health illness, when I'm in a state of depression or anxiety, I'm usually in like an existential crisis where I'm hyper aware of my human my human vulnerabilities, my feeling that I'm not doing something in alignment with what the purpose I want to contribute or the values I want to contribute to the world, or just that sense of I'm not safe because of the world.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then, of course, existential philosophy. Can you tell us more about like, what do you mean by that? What kind of exploration was it?
Yeah, so classically, at least in the quote unquote West, we call Søren Ubie Kierkegaard, the Danish writer, poet, theologian, philosopher. He wrote, I forget when he died, but he died pretty young, but he wrote voluminous amounts of works. He probably could fill an entire bookcase, and all of his journals were uh, published and are being translated continually. And except for the parts that he ripped out because it was too personal, all of them are basically published. And he's credited as being the father, quote unquote, of existentialism. And for the page, the passage, the journal entry of his that I read every year on his birthday and almost many times a year is about I can know all the stuff in the world. I can know this. I can learn an extra XYZ. But if I don't find out what it is that I'm actually living for, then nothing. It's kind of pointless. Like
Yeah,
whether he comes from a more religious perspective, but his work is read internationally by virtually any sort of communal really interested in this self-discovery. And then along the same not wavelength, but time period was Friedrich Nietzsche, right?
mhm.
He's a little bit more well known, and he's without going into too much of his story. And then into the 20th century with Martin Heidegger, with Paul Sartre, the French existentialist, who's actually more well known, and those are the core ones that you would learn. Or Fyodor Dostoevsky also. He's more of a writer, fiction writer per se, a story writer, as opposed to like writing an actual treatise per se. But what they have in all common is it doesn't matter if everything is pointless or meaningless. I can co-create the meaning today and what life will be like. Yeah, sure. I could die tomorrow.
Mhm.
The world could blow up, or an asteroid could hit. The Earth's axis tilts by like 2 degrees, and we all freeze instantaneously, or something. Or sun shifts. I don't know how many meters into shifts, and then the Earth suddenly is not as orbit anymore. It's like, oh, there we go. So, so in the end, it's like, okay, a lot of things we're worrying about. I mean, they're important to keep us alive, but in a way of speaking, it's like, what's really the point? So, so in a way, if I like to explain it as existential philosophy, is that you're co-creating what today and tomorrow actually means. And Viktor Frankl, the Man's Search for Meaning guy, he's really well known for. I think he created his existential therapy. I think is his school of psychology. But really, if you look back, it comes from way past Søren Kierkegaard. And you can look even back further to the Judeo-Christian book of Ecclesiastes when they talk about everything is meaningless and what's the point of anything. And they never give an answer per se because the answer is really individual. Once we realize that we're there co-creating what the meaning is, everything is meaningless, but that enables us to make things meaningful as opposed to someone telling us this is a meaning you need in your life. And in today's modern age, we have so many options that it's almost in a way that we have infinite options, right? Versus if you grew up in a certain tribe or you're apprenticed to a certain person where your ideals or your possibilities were limited. But now you can literally go to live anywhere, right? You can, especially in the circles we are in, like people who have a lot of education, they could get more education, get more training, or not, or whatever. And then there's so many options. And in a way, everything's becomes meaningless because there's so many options. But because there's
Yeah.
so many options, then you can really craft at the core what is meaningful. But then the question is, how do you know what that is? And that's the long answer to what you're saying is you're co-creating the meaning and what it means to be authentic, meaningful, fulfilled. I'm not saying that I know what that exactly is for me or anyone else, but it is an active, conscious journey that is happening in every moment.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of, because obviously you've done a lot of deep dive into your self development and a lot of very deep exploration into these very philosophical ideas. So, for people that maybe haven't had exposure, can we take it back kind of to the
Yeah,
basics on helping to put, I guess, into layman's terms, kind of the four pillars that you mentioned, and then we'll break it down a little bit onto how they can apply it and
yeah,
who would benefit from each of the four. I know that you mentioned they all can come
yeah,
together,
yeah,
but
yeah,
applica- applications
yeah.
depending on where they're at in their life.
I would say the 4P, the purpose, plan, process, psyche one is the most uh, intellectual or logistical or structured. Is basically does my purpose, what I want in life,
Hmm.
and what my plan is to make that happen, and my daily process. Am I doing something today that actually is part of my plan? And what's my psychology that's stopping me or helping me get there? And ultimately, are all those things aligned? Let's say my plan is to be super duper rich. I don't know, whatever. But then I have nothing in my calendar plan for my process to actually make money or invest or learn how to make money. So there's a uh, not lack of alignment,
Yeah.
or
And I
yeah,
mentioned too that often when people say it's like the SMART goals, right? When they
yeah,
just
yeah,
say a goal, but there's no definition of what rich is.
yeah,
And then they hit the point where, for me, when I found myself in my first real deep existential crisis, it was because my ex boyfriend died. And I had been living with my head down to fulfill these goals that were so superficial. And then when I stepped back to ask whose goals were these, kind of what you were mentioning with how you got into medicine and how we navigate fitting in, and like when we actually are there with ourselves and like who am I and what do I actually want to contribute.
yeah,
Oh, good. Not just what other people are telling me I should want to contribute. And I would always question people, what at what cost are they wanting to be rich and why do they want to be rich,
yeah,
because
yeah,
we hear many people with very high income with very high net worth that are still very depressed because they haven't done these deep dives.
mhm,
And then I find myself, like, there are some people in my life that seem to be very happy because they also don't do these deep dives, and that's what helps them to stay happy, is because they don't land themselves in these
yeah,
existential crises. So then when I'm sitting here, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it, is how I feel.
yeah,
I'm like, well, once I've sat in my existential crisis, I can't just pretend like it doesn't exist. I still find it's very hard for me to dedicate a whole lot of time to something I find to be low yield in terms of the value I want to create for the world.
yeah.
And I find that's where our energies resonate. It's like I need figured life out.
Yeah, like you're saying, sometimes people do have a plan and a process, and they get whatever goal is that they wanted, but they may find out, not that this is a bad thing, that oh, that wasn't really the purpose I was looking for,
Mhm.
or they were hijacking their psychology to believe the thing that they wanted wasn't really the thing that they wanted.
I totally do that. I coach myself into, so I have to do certain projects. I have to because someone puts them on my plate. I don't have to. We know we don't have to do anything, but let's pretend like I have to do these projects. I will find a way to convince myself that it will somehow fit into the
Yeah,
values I'm looking to offer the world. Like I will try to morph it. I'm like, well, I guess. And that's where then, like, I now have so much pain. I was mentioning to you earlier that I'm starting to feel that pain of reflecting on the past year and how I allowed myself again to put everyone else's priorities before mine again. And that's fine. Like, yeah, it's nice to be able to do things for people, but I resonated with you feeling lost because I'm like, well, here I am. And not only do I feel lost, but I feel used and I feel oppressed and I feel taken advantage of. But I'm like, I know I have responsibility in that. So,
yeah. This is where the this one of the four things I do. It's very useful on its own, but it can be used to uh, overwork or over perfectionize or try really too hard. It's like, oh, my purpose is to succeed and work a lot and gain these things. But that's because that's a context, right? But then that's what the other parts of it balance it. So I think this is actually a great part. So then Jungian psychology, well, Carl Jung, he's like the one of the underdogs of the 20th century. Like, everyone knows who Sigmund Freud is. And Carl Jung was Freud wanted Jung to be his successor, quote unquote, to his school. But Carl Jung pretty much said, "Yeah, I don't think so. I disagree with what he said." And then he and his work has a huge influence on us today. The lie detector, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the mythological journeys in which like Star Wars and all these movies are based on. Shadow work, that's he's responsible for introducing the word shadow into the lexicon that we use the way we do today. Number four, also he's the one that uh, expanded the idea of the complex. And Freud also used complex in a way, but Carl Jung made it more expanded and somewhat like what we use it today. So he's kind of for me kind of like the unsung hero, and then he's also the one that brought in the idea of alchemy as having a psychological aspect to it. And he's also responsible, or partly responsible, for people taking the word like Age of Pisces and Aquarius from astrology. And he's the one that people took that from him, and I mean, they turned it into stuff that maybe was different from what he was intending. But he's just basically influential in ways a lot of people don't even realize. But the reason I like, I summarize what his work is, we can learn from an unconscious part of our psyche, and we can learn from collective aspects of the psyche. So let me give an example here. Shadow work essentially is an aspect of our unconscious. Is when we yell at someone, "Oh, you're being too perfectionistic, and that's making you life terrible, whatever." But in a lot of situations, it's actually in this as a context. I'm the one who feels that way and needs that lesson, but I'm telling someone else, "You're being over." We project, we learned that in medical school at some point. The defense mechanism of
yeah,
projection
yeah.
about the discomfort that we have in our psyche, we put it onto someone else. So that if I can realize, oh, that's my unconscious actually trying to tell me that I'm being over perfectionistic, that I need to learn from that. So that is one example of there are aspects of us that we don't realize that shows up in our dreams, our imagination, movies that we like, characters that we like in shows that we respond to. Again, Star Wars is great because it's has the light and the dark. There's a balance in the Force. There's a aspect of the bad guy, one of the bad guys, like Darth Vader in the end, actually has light. So there's this, and Luke fighting. I think he was on Dagobah, right? He was fighting Darth Vader in his mind, but then he cut his head off or something, but it was actually him under the helmet. So like, these are all like the shadow, right? The aspects of us that are not apparent to us, that are uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because somebody was saying that we often hate the person that appears perfect on movies.
Yep, yep.
And it's funny because it's kind of true. Like you just like, oh,
Well, it's more. I think more correctly, we like characters that go on their psychological healing journey, and we almost live vicariously through their. I mean, the ones that are really popular would be like Star Wars or Harry Potter or Hunger Games, where there's their journey, difficulty, there's their darker side, there's a mentor, there's this completion. Occasionally, there's a contrasexual or contra gender aspect of themselves too. So that's another thing Carl Jung says. Everyone has an unconscious masculine and feminine aspect to themselves. So that's part one of the reasons we fall in love with someone. They have some aspect of our unconscious that we project onto them. Oh, that person will complete me. If I have them, then I'll be saved. And then we get married, and I find that they have hair on their toes, or they
mm,
have their fart smells a lot, and they're actually not a perfect person. And again, that's just for him, Carl Jung, and I guess for me too. It's aspect of we have aspects of our unconscious that are we can learn from. Essentially, that's the short version is their aspect of ourselves, our hidden repressed sides that we have difficulty identifying with. It could be negative or positive things, right? Our shadow could be super confident, super well spoken, super uh, well to do, and
oh, thanks for
relationship person.
describing me. I thought you were talking
Yeah,
about my
exactly.
shadow, but then all of a sudden I heard you describing me. So it's
But then we
fine.
are also the opposite, right? We have anger, we have sexual angst, emotional reactivity,
Mhm.
which which I argue. Actually, let me come back to that. I would argue is that that's a one way to look at a lot of the um, tribalistic way of being in the United States regarding a lot of political issues, but also how people take out their fighting. They're trying to fight the shadow in themselves, but they do that actually by fighting other people. It's
Uh,
telling people what to do,
yeah.
or women this or whatever that, and it's
You're gonna spark fires here on YouTube and you start talking politics and everything that they're trying to control about a woman's body is very upsetting.
oh, yeah, I don't claim to know much about the actual topic. I mean, I do know because of in my circles and I'm a physician, things like that. But I'm not a woman, so it's like I don't really know. But
Our
then
we should be. I mean, we won't even. We're gonna stay in Zen mode for a second here.
so what I can talk about is the meta psychological aspects of it, and in short is we it's much easier to pretend other people are the source of our problems and we can fix other people or try to do things control other people when in fact is actually aspect of ourselves that's like oh my own it's let's say I'm a guy like I'm scared by my inner femininity or something and then I
Mm.
have to do something about that, but in reality it's actually about me with me my relationship with me, but I'm taking it out on other people. Or I'm angry at myself and I want a part of me to go away or like, disappear. But then I take it out on someone else and do that, unfortunately, to someone else. And that's the Jungian metapsychological perspective, which I think, brings a different dimension to this, that we can and should learn from our unconscious. Otherwise, not just our personal but our collective psyche. So depends on the person. The shadow and the unconscious aspects is totally different, which is why I think it's very helpful as a meta model, that it's not, oh, this one model fits you. Well, it's a model that depends on each person's situation.
Mhm.
And then that makes the purpose, plan, process, psyche context larger, because it's not just about my conscious life. It's also about my unconscious life. It's also about my repressed side. It's about my masculinity and my femininity. It's about things, my wounds or my emotions that trigger me, and that that makes it polishes the picture or makes it dirtier, whichever, in a way that's more full. So that's, or who will benefit from Jungian psychology is anyone who is wants to see more fuller aspects of themselves, and realize that they are a more fuller person than they are in our awake, quote unquote, life. So that's I'll take a breather there if you have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Francis Yu, for joining me on this video today. We went ahead and took a pause because I know we got deep, and you can go pee, grab a snack, dance around a little bit. And if you are feeling the urge to jump right on back for some more information on healing, on self-development, and more time with Dr. Yu, no need to worry. The next video will also feature Dr. Francis Yu. And I'm so glad to all be here on our own healing and self-development journeys together. And I'm grateful for this wonderful community. If you have questions, comments, let us know you're here. Please put them in the comments below. Of course, we'll have Dr. Yu's information as well if you want to contact him directly. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you again soon.